don't you? Us.
Something is happening, and you don't know what it is.
This nonsense really began when Bob Dylan gave marijuana to the Beatles. And the Beatles' music changed, no doubt, and then they took the LSD, and the music changed some more, and it sent signals to the people of San Francisco who were very admiring of the Byrds. You know, the Byrds took the best of the Beatles, the best of Dylan, and synthesized it.
It was really a question of everyone admiring Dylan. And we felt kind of honored that he admired us. We'd go to see him as the big guru.
Do you think of yourself primarily as a singer or as a poet?
Oh, I think of myself more as a song and dance man, you know.
That was it, really. You'd find the Byrds would do Tambourine Man, and a lot of his other tunes, too. And they'd add that jangly thing to it. And then we'd pick up the jangly thing off them and put that in... If I needed someone to love, you're the one that I'd be thinking of. If I needed someone, if I had some more time to spend, then
The Beatles played their last ever concert to a paying audience in August 1966 and took some time off. As 1966 drew to a close, the press began a round of speculation. Fans were worried.
Well, I think they might split up in 1967 because they're doing different things now. But I hope they don't.
What would you think if I sang?
In fact, the Beatles had not split up, but tired of touring and constant exposure, they'd simply disappeared into the studio for an unprecedented length of time. But they couldn't escape the question of the hour.
Are the people going to go their own ways in 1967? They could be, you know, on our own or together. We're always involved with each other, whatever we're doing.
Did you ever see a time when, in fact, you weren't working together?
I could see us working not together for a period, but we'd always get together for one reason or other. I mean, you need other people for ideas as well, but, you know, and we all get along fine.
Oh, I get by with help from my friends. I get high.
Performance for us. See, it's gone downhill, performance, because we can't develop when no one can hear us, you know what I mean? So for us to perform is it's difficult, gets difficult each time.
You mean they don't
More
listen
difficult.
to you, and therefore you don't want to do that?
Oh yeah, we want to do it, but if we're not listened to, then, and we can't even hear ourselves, then we can't improve in that. We can't get any better. So we're trying to get better with things like recording.
Let's pretend we're not the Beatles. That was a pretty big dare right there, you know. And it changed everything. So we could go in, what was great about it was liberating, because you could go in and work on a track. And whereas before, someone would sort of say, okay, you know, it's Eleanor Rigby. Now Paul sings the lead. Eleanor Rigby, you know, sort of, now it could be, now, you know, Crazy Moondog is going to do the vocals.
Do you think that in the new year that you're going to be going your own ways instead of being a group?
No.
No?
A lot of the time was spent actually just trying to get sounds and trying to find sounds, invent them. Nowadays, it's pretty easy because, in fact, it's too easy. There's so many sounds available just by hitting a button. And all these machines that, because of some of those records in the 60s, they've invented machinery where you just switch it on and you instantly get an effect, which is something that we were trying to discover in those years.
Working with them on this process of discovery was the man who had produced all their records, George Martin. He explained some of the new techniques that he and the Beatles were exploring.
Tape and electronics have brought an enormous new feel to music. It's surprising what you can do once you have a sound recorded on tape. You can speed it up, you can slow it down, you can turn it round back to front, you can compress it, equalize it, add echo. There's a whole range of things you can do, which it would be obviously far too complicated to describe to you in detail. But take the sound of an ordinary cymbal, for example. Have a listen to this. Now, have you heard it backwards?
Are you getting bored of being the Beatles after all this time?
No, I'm having a great time. Merry Christmas to you. Long time since I've seen you.
Thank you very much, Ringo.
That's all right, thank you.
Are you going to work now?
Well, I'll see what they're up to. I think it may be tea time with any luck. Bye.
Perhaps the greatest wonder of the Beatles and the greatest delight was that they actually came from Liverpool. That was the key to this thing. It was the four Scousers exploring inner space and finding just more and more Scousness down there. So that when you've got a song like A Little Help from My Friends, in which there are wonderful, tender moments, do you need anybody? I just need someone to love. Can it be anybody? I just need someone to love. You've also got sort of rather a nudgy thing, like, what do you see when you turn out the light there, eh? I can't tell you, but I know it's nice. Why? That's just quite a, a sort of rude joke in the middle of all this stuff that people are getting across the world as signals.
We started to realise that there weren't as many frontiers as we thought there were, and that we could break barriers in things like album covers and stuff, I mean, we would never have considered doing something like that a few years earlier.
My main contribution, I think, was to decide that if we made the crowd in a certain way, it could be anybody. So I think that was that was the thing I would claim that really changed the direction of it. That by making it was never an actual collage stuck down. It was a built collage. It was life-size. Things happened, like there was a young boy who was helping who said, "Oh, could I do a guitar in hyacinths?" And it was such a nice sort of gentle, sweet idea that we said, yes, certainly. So this sort of white shape at the front is actually a guitar. One of the myths that rose was that you can read that as P-A-U-L ? When the stories of Paul's death were rife, this was a sign that Paul had indeed died. But of course it was never intended to be P-A-U-L ? It's simply a guitar. Another myth which has grown up is that these plants around the edge were marijuana plants, and I think it's been kind of established now that they're not.
There's a bit of a dispute about this cover, everyone's kind of, oh, we can't do that, because that's the thing, if you're being free, there's obviously a lot of people say, oh, naughty, watch it.
They'd been refused permission by the EMI music department to issue this cover because there were massive, important people on it. And they came to me and said, I said, well, it's very risky to me, it's very dangerous to publish this in America.
He was great, Sir Joe, actually. He was very good during that time. I think it must have come as a real shock to him, all this stuff.
Paul McCartney said, there's no risk whatsoever. Everybody on here will be delighted. I said, well, that's what you think, and I hope you're right. Oh, no problem, no problem.
And he came round to my house, he said, I'm afraid, old chap, like, we can't have Gandhi. I said, what do you mean, Gandhi? He's all right, what's wrong with him? Well, I'd offend the Indians.
They were very important. We shouldn't upset India. And in his particular case, I refused to have anything to do with it immediately. Paul McCartney this time, I think, was on his own. He immediately agreed. And so I said, right, well, that's out. Now, as far as the rest are concerned, I think we've got to make an effort to get permission from everybody.
Mae West wrote back and said, what would I be doing in the Lonely Hearts Club? No, I won't be on it. So then I think it was suggested that the Beatles all wrote her a personal letter and said, we'd very much like you to be on it. Then she said, yes, she would.
Nothing happened from that day to this. As far as I know, not a single complaint came from anybody. Nobody asked to be left off the record.
They've got all these rules for everything. Rules of how to live, how to paint, how to make music. And it's just not true anymore, They don't work, all those rules. There could be another answer,
Discovery Sunday will continue on the Discovery Channel.
Picture yourself in a boat on a river with tangerine trees and marmalade skies. Somebody calls you, you answer quite slowly. A girl with kaleidoscope eyes. Cellophane flowers of yellow and green, flowering over your hair. Look for the girl with the stunning horizon. She's gone. Lucy in the sky with diamonds. Lucy in the sky with diamonds.
We are celebrating not only Sergeant Pepper, but the spirit of its time. All over the world, young people were experimenting with alternatives to what they saw as the repression of convention and materialism. One of the charming ideas of the day was the white bicycle of Amsterdam, free, communally owned, to be left at journey's end for someone else to use. The plan was the brainchild of a young anarchist group called Provo, who were resolutely without leaders. One of the people not leading Provo is nowadays habitually to be found on his raft, the Yuppie. We asked Robert Jasper Grootveld what was happening in Amsterdam.
The very word happening was the main thing about it. Happening. What's happening? In the 50s, we felt ourselves bored. We felt ourselves very, very much bored because there was nothing happening. There was the big feeling about nothing was happening. So let's make a happening. Geef dit zich geen sigaretten!
The Lord Mayor of Amsterdam banned happenings, and police loudspeaker cars toured the city.
They shouted through the neighborhoods of the inner city. Happening is forbidden. There's no happening. 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 Forbidden. And people in the pub standing. Oh yes, it's Saturday night. The happening. Yes, let's go. So thousands of people went to the happening because of the police. That was how it works, you know. I order you to disperse. Disperse. You have 5 minutes to disperse. Carry on your business.
From the Netherlands to California, the police, unwittingly, became crucial in converting small random gatherings into large, unavoidable happenings.
Something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children.
I came down and found it more like a block party than anything political. Everybody was having a good time talking, and it was like a party. Then police came in platoons and charged into that crowd and beat up everybody indiscriminately. And the Strip having been my hangout for years made me angry, and I tried to figure out what it was they were up to, and it didn't make any sense. I felt that they must have misread what those kids were all about.
I thought it was a moment that deserved to be looked at a little more closely, and of course I got caught right up into it. I was the first person they arrested. 1A was my number. They had a little card they held up in front of me as they photographed me. I was manacled behind my back.
So they arrested some 300 people or more, and it never made the papers, and it seemed very sinister. Biggest arrest since the Japanese roundup after Pearl Harbor.
What a field day for the heat.
And as a result, Stephen Stills wrote the song For What It's Worth, which was a big hit after that. And the people downtown thought it was all dying down just as that record was going up the charts, and everybody was laughing. And the police were saying, well, it's just about over. I don't think we're going to have any more trouble.
Paranoia strikes deep into your life, it will creep. Start when you're always afraid. Step out of line, the man come and take you away. We better stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going. You better stop now. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going.
Meanwhile, some of Britain's young people, too, were starting to freak out, as they said in those days. This smiling man in a silk jacket on a drizzly January morning had a message for the people on the bus. This happening was loosely organized out of the offices of the International Times, Britain's underground newspaper, which mixed stories about magic mushrooms, Mao Zedong, The Who, and racism in Cuba with bizarre layouts and a certain bluntness in the editorial line.
We were aware that there was an international movement going on. We were aware through direct communication. People came to San Francisco from Amsterdam, from London, from New York, from Paris, to share currents of ideas.
David Simpson was one of a group in San Francisco who styled themselves Diggers after the zealots of the English Civil War. Another was actor-playwright Peter Coyote.
The Diggers didn't stand for anything, but they were about personal authenticity and taking responsibility for your own visions.
They were the finest people on earth, the Diggers, and a more fantastic bunch of people to have trouble with and a row with without coming to blows you couldn't wish to meet. In my opinion, they were the core of the whole counterculture because they were our conscience. You could not do right for doing wrong with them. They were like those mothers who were into all your business. You don't do this, don't I caught you doing that, I've seen that, I know what you're doing. I'm sorry, well, don't do it again.
Like Provo, the Diggers were resolutely without leaders. One of their non-leaders was writer Peter Berg.
The Diggers had several goals. One was the immediate one, to simply act out free. Put free in front of any word you could think of. Free phone box, free lunch, free district attorney, free judge, free policeman, free boy, free girl, whatever, especially free love. Love being the word that had been foisted on Haight-Ashbury. And the long-term goal was to create a bomb, a situation in which the people that were refugees from American culture at the time and Western civilization would be able to re-see exchanges between each other.
The Beatles served that function in many respects because the great international attention that they achieved obviously indicated, given the lyrics of their music and the sensibilities that it expressed, that something was going on.
It's getting better all the time. I used to get mad at my school. Teachers had taught me weren't cool. They're holding me down, turning me around, filling me up with your rules. I've got to admit, it's getting better, a little better all the time. I have to admit, it's getting better, it's getting better. Shouldn't you be mine?
1967 was a remarkable year because the solitary individual consciousness that had been developed by many individual people over the previous decade, from the mid-50s, seemed finally to come together in a kind of be-in together, as we had in San Francisco. There was a human be-in, in which it was no hyper-rational purpose. It was a community project just to be there together to share each other's company, everybody spending the time together. As the Beatles were spending time together as a community group, the four of them, and giving an example to youth around the world that guys can be friends.
It was a beautiful event, The Human Being. People emerged, there was like 10,000 people there that came from God knows where. It was like this calling, like a conch shell blowing, hey, from an ancient time. Come out, come back, reappear, all you gods and goddesses, you divine people, home, come. And these people came.
Turn on, tune in, and drop out.
Dr. Timothy Leary, a psychologist who had been fired from Harvard University, was undoubtedly the most internationally conspicuous prophet of the psychedelic revolution.
I mean, drop out of high school, drop out of college, drop out of graduate school, drop out of junior executive, drop out of senior executive, turn on, tune in, drop out.
Discovery Sunday continue on the Discovery Channel.
San Francisco's Be-In, the gathering of the tribes, set the style for a whole wave of love-ins, be-ins, freak-out, solstice celebrations across the world. In the Summer of Love, California led the way. Messengers went out to spread the word, like Chet Helms.
I bring you greetings from the tribes of the North. I'd like to say as well that about 4 weeks ago, I spent some time in New York, and I spent some time in London, and I'm here to tell you it's happening all over. I used to be cruel to my woman, I teased her and kept her apart from the things that she loved. Man, I was mean, but I'm changing my teeth, and I'm doing the best that I can. I admit it's getting better, a little better, all the time. Yes, I admit it's getting better, it's getting better. Since you've been mine, getting so much better all the time. It's getting better all the time. It's getting better all the time.
I really wish the people that look with anger at the weirdos, at the happenings, at the psychedelic freakout, would be unbiased about it. Because they really don't realize that what these people are talking about is something that they really want themselves. It's something that everyone wants. You know, it's personal freedom to be able to talk and be able to say things. And it's dead straight. It's a real sort of basic pleasure for everyone. But it looks weird from the outside, but it isn't.
People like to live in a cozy rut, which, again, you know, we were all quite happy in our little ruts right up until, I think, 1966, when this experience happened.
Until October 1966, possession of LSD had not been a criminal offense. Since World War II, doctors had conducted experiments into the therapeutic potential of the drug. But beyond medicine, some of the guinea pigs were saying they'd had a good time, and LSD was spreading to home and college.
Well, what's so great about it?
Down. I hope this isn't being recorded. Is it?
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, it's just that you asking it to be described, it really, whatever it is, you know, good or bad, it really just can't be described. It's something that has to be experienced. And it's a completely individual thing.
So next time you see the word psychedelic, you know, freak out music and all of that, look at it straight and think, well, psychedelic, now what does it mean? And then somebody might explain, you know.
One pill makes you larger, and one pill makes you small, and the ones that mother gives you don't do anything at all. Go ask Alice when she sent me before. And if you go chasing rabbits and you know you're going to fall, tell 'em a hookah smoking caterpillar has given you a call. Lord Alice, when she was just small. When the men on the chessboard get up and tell you where to go, and you've just had some kind of mushroom, and your mind is moving low, so ask Alice, I think you'll know. Logic and proportion have fallen sloppy dead, and the white knight is walking backwards, and the red queen's off with her head. Remember what the dog said.
As Robin Williams says, if you can remember the 60s, you weren't really there. And that sort of almost sums it up. People normally didn't get on stage while high on acid playing unless by accident, which was usually enjoyable, but I don't think it made for a lot of real heavy music, as they say. Generally, I think it was more the style and texture of music that came out of a culture semi-immersed in acid some of the time. Like, you don't play on it very much. I mean, your strings get this big, you know. Whoa. So it's not really conducive to acting, functioning together with other people in the right key and all that. People just wander off in other keys and something else happening over here.
That was one of the wheels of John Lennon's road. It's a gas. If you're over 80, that means it's fast. 6,000 pounds worth of 1965 Phantom, inside almost as marvelous as out.
I was in John Lennon's Rose, the pretty gypsy caravan Rose. I heard him say, I didn't know what he meant, I don't often have acid for breakfast. I thought, oh, it sounds awful. It was like a man who'd had bad food, isn't it? Bacon and an acid stomach, you know. And what a funny thing to say. And then he said, and to celebrate, I'm going to play you this. And he said, listen, what do you think of this record? Really, we felt liberated by the experience of taking LSD, and that's why it's hard to see it lumped with addicted drugs and other things. Because I think if you were doing it all the time, it would be a madhouse. You couldn't raise children or do a job, but to have a good look at the other realities, the other verities, other than those structures of, you know, I'm 42 and I should be 42, I think it was helpful. It set me free, and it set Joan free, and I'm grateful we took it together. I wouldn't like to have been out there on my own in bad company. It's Dr. Leary, who was also somewhat of a leader, and was very keen on set and setting, as he called it. You should be in a good frame of mind, and you shouldn't be sort of on Reading Station, you know, with a load of soldiers. When he took it, you should be sitting in a field with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and then you feel all right.
Well, if you couldn't manage to be in the company of the Archbishop of Canterbury, you could, in 1967, fairly readily come across Dr. Timothy Leary. On this occasion, addressing a convocation of Students' Union presidents, Dr. Leary took as his text Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, in which he found for him a not wholly unexpected significance.
Now, the message that I read into this album is surprisingly enough a familiar one. Turn on, tune in, and drop out.
And I don't apologize for being kind of goofy, because at the same time, we had Johnson running the country, sending 500,000 troops to Vietnam. We stopped that, and we had Edgar Hoover, total madman, running our secret police. So we did great, but I don't want to be held responsible for the day-to-day quotes, because literally we were out there in the front lines just making it up as we went along. And I give us this credit. We were willing to take risks. We were willing to be holy fools. We were willing to make asses of ourselves. But let's not hang these portraits of ourselves, making fools of ourselves, on the walls of the Smithsonian Institute.
There were many people, including Timothy Leary, who thought that the psychedelic drugs would bring about Eden. And that was the image of the Garden of Eden, of course, in rock and roll, even to some extent in Sgt. Pepper, though there was a slightly charming, cynical wit about that. However, as Kerouac said when he first took magic mushrooms, psilocybin, walking on water wasn't built in a day.
Timothy Leary's famous slogan, turn on, tune in, and drop out, got a lot of people in hot water to a certain degree. All of us in the Haight-Ashbury had more or less done that. But to become a national figurehead, saying in the media, turn on, tune in, and drop out, had certain ramifications. For instance, how do you stay alive after you've done that? Now, at that time, I was not a kid. I was not an old man, certainly, but I was not a kid, and I had been around, and I could take care of myself to a certain degree. But that slogan was heard by 13 and 14-year-olds living in the hinterlands of America, and they came running to meccas like San Francisco looking for this paradise, and found something slightly less.
If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair.
I would say that the last 18 months have seen a tremendous increase of the so-called hippies who have invaded and lived in this area.
Some gentle people there.
It is the belief of the people who live within the area that we, the middle class or the upper class, have done a very, very poor job in running our government and our way of life.
Combination of heroin and methadone, producing a speedy, powerful high. Stoned, high as on LSD. Straight, square, conventional, also the feeling immediately after a heroin fix. Trip is an LSD experience. Turn on is to commence a far-out experience is to turn on with LSD.
I don't really want to go on and on about LSD, I'd like to be able to say, you know, that it was because of some other reason, but it was because LSD was such an experience that it took you right out of the ego at certain points during the 1,000 years it took to wear off.
Yourself, no one else can make you change. And to see you're really only very small, and life goes on within you and without you.
We'd had enough acid. It had done all it could do for us. You know, there was no going any further. It only does so much.
I picked up this Vivekananda book and he said, each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest that divinity.
Discovery Sunday will continue on the Discovery Channel.
Really a feeling that there was something very, very unique and special going on, and that we were at the center of it.
Walking on things I love, but I wanna know for sure. Come in, stop it to me one more time again. Oh, sure, I love you. We all love each other, don't we? Am I right? Let me hear you say yeah there. If you want to read the road, got to do it when it's cold. Take all your magic. Get to do it right now. Everybody look alive to that play. I want y'all to say it one more time. Everybody get together. Say it. Everybody say it. Say it. Just a bit louder. Say it. Early in the morning. Say it. Late in the evening. Say it. Midnight hour. Say it. Everybody say it. Say it. Everybody say it. Say it. One more time. Say it. Everybody say it. Say it. One more time. Say it. Everybody do it. Say it. Okay, yeah. Say it. Okay, yeah. Say it. Stop it. Stop it. Say it. Stop it. Stop it. Say it.
Tell me what love, honey, what love is love. Well, it's like a ball and in a
For 1 second in history, in California, it was really a merger. There were no cops, there were no hippies. It was just an experience that everybody shared. I don't think there were any arrests in the entire weekend. The policemen turned their faces away from pot smokers, because obviously there was a lot of that going on, but there were no arrests, and it was really a wonderful, warm experience for everyone who was there.
Monterey was hardly the setting for all these types. They didn't know quite to do with all of us. They were used to very, you know, low-key jazz bows coming in and blowing the tunes rather than a bunch of crazed hippies or runaways or whatever we were, whatever anybody else wants to call all the people that were there or all the people that managed to be part of the out fringe of Sgt. Pepper's band. And that was an important moment for us to recognize that there was more than one type, and we all could be together and share the same attitudes of not just the same stage. I was particularly impressed with the attitude that somebody as far out from our spectrum as Ravi Shankar could get up and play a sitar and cut through all the jets that were taking off from local airports.
Ravi Shankar became one of the greatest influences in my life, and still to this day, I still rate him as the best musician on the planet that I've actually heard. In Indian music, it's tied into the spiritual life. And so there's no way you can seriously get involved with the classical ragas of India without finding out what's behind it. And behind everything that has any depth, you'll find the yogis of the Himalayas.
One sits down comfortably in a chair or wherever one wants, and he uses a thought that he has been given especially for himself, and starts experiencing the subtler state of thought.
Are you experiencing the subtler state of thought at this moment?
No, I am out in the grot speaking to you.
What do you have to do to obtain this state of thought?
Just a few instructions from a trained teacher, and one begins to experience it.
How long does it take?
About half an hour.
And how do you know when it's happened?
One begins to feel relaxed. Right from the beginning, one begins to feel some improved level of well-being.
You just feel more energetic, you know, just simply for doing work or anything. You just come out of it. I just, well, let's get going, you know.
Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock as the day begins. Silently closing her bedroom door.
It's an old-fashioned waltz with an old-fashioned throbbing cello and a plashing harp and a modulation to the dominant. And then this arching little tune, which is full of hope and regret.
Wilfrid Mellors, composer and professor of music, was mocked in the 60s for taking the Beatles seriously and suggesting their music would last.
This balance between the hopeful dreams of adolescence and the regret of age is most beautifully encapsulated in the coda to this little song. The parents are singing, we gave her everything that money could get. We struggled hard all our lives to get by and so on. And then she's leaving something inside that all was denied for so many years. And this is going on simultaneously. But then in the little coda, after you've had the repeat of the refrain, it goes... Why is that so subtle? Well, the effect is that it's been going sharpwards. From their door going sharpwards, upwards, full of hope, you see. But then the actual cadence is an amen. It's what's called a plagal cadence. And so that flattens us down. And you get that wonderful balance between the two. Well, that I'm sure is absolutely instinctive. I don't. The Beatles didn't say, "Oh, let's have a dominant modulation followed by a plagal cadence." But that's genius. I mean, that's how it happens.
I was run over by the truth one day. Ever since the accident, I've walked this way. So stick my legs in plaster. Tell me lies about Vietnam. Heard the alarm clock screaming with pain. Couldn't find myself, so I went back to sleep again. So fill my ears with silver. Stick my legs in plaster. Tell me lies about Vietnam. Every time I shut my eyes, all I see is flames.
Think you got any of you?
Made a marble phone book, carved all the names. So coat my eyes with butter, fill my ears with silver, stick my legs in plaster, tell me lies about Vietnam. I smell something burning, hope it's just my brains. They're only dropping peppermints and daisy chains. So stuff my nose with garlic, coat my eyes with butter, fill my ears with silver, stick my legs in plaster, tell me lies about Vietnam. Where were you at the time of the crime? Down by the cenotaph, drinking slime. So chain my tongue with whiskey, stuff my nose with garlic, coat my eyes with butter, fill my ears with silver, stick my legs in plaster, tell me lies about Vietnam. You put your bombers in, you put your conscience out, you take the human being and you twist it all about. So scrub my skin with women, chain my tongue with whiskey, stuff my nose with garlic, fill my ears with silver, stick my legs in plaster, tell me lies about Vietnam.
Discovery Sunday will continue on the Discovery Channel.
Did you know you're running out of time if you want to take advantage of the ProWatts offer from AT&T? Call 1-800-222-0400 right away. We've lowered the price of ProWatts. Now any business spending $50,000 to $5,000 a month can save money on AT&T long distance. But you have only a few days left.
Turn to Discovery Sunday on the Discovery Channel.
Protest against the American military establishment was, of course, nothing new. President Eisenhower had warned of the increasing power of the military-industrial complex 8 years previously. But in 1967, a new and frankly weird element entered the Pentagon's list of problems.
Playfulness became increasingly important as police pressure increased. And also, I think that independent of police pressure, playfulness was seen as some kind of an antidote to the excessive seriousness and ponderousness of the old left. And there was a feeling that there should be a youthful, humorous, playful energy. The psychedelics were also a factor. The psychedelics, besides being instructive, were fun.
And we're going to assemble a mass of holy men to surround the Pentagon. And they're going to surround it with chanting and love and drum beating. And the Pentagon is going to rise into the air on October 21st. And when it gets about 300 feet in the air, it's going to start to vibrate. Slowly at first, and then a little quicker. And all the evil spirits are going to pour out.
There were 8 or 10 of us meeting in New York to talk about the levitation of the Pentagon. And all of us had been living on the East Coast. But we had a surprise visitor to this meeting, Michael Bowen, who heard about it on the West Coast and went to Mexico to consult with shamans on the matter of levitation, and then came to our meeting in New York, surprising all of us because we were just trying to put together an imaginative media project. We didn't expect the building to actually leave terra firma, but this fellow arrived from the shamans of Mexico with ideas of how to make it actually levitate. And I began to see there an interesting difference between East Coast and West Coast at that time. East Coast being into media project more, and West Coast being into lifestyle.
Lifestyle on the West Coast was based on the belief that what was possible was limited only by the human imagination. To say free was to be free. If you could think it, you could make it come true.
People in this community are practicing what people have spoken about for centuries, and it threatens to overthrow the rest of the American establishment, which is built upon the motives of greed, anger, lust, and self-interest. The idea for the Oracle came to me in a dream. I woke up in the morning and remembered seeing a newspaper being read all over the world with rainbows on it. And I went out in the streets and started to tell people I had a dream about a newspaper being read all around the world with rainbows on it. Everyone said, wow, what a great idea, let's do it.
The underground press, the music, the happenings, and the new ways of protesting the war were all products of the same tide of playfulness. If the rest of the world had difficulty understanding the message, it was hardly surprising.
We even did lettering that didn't say anything at all, that would really stop people. But people, you know, we would drive, we'd be around the neighborhood, and there'd be our posters up in store windows, and there would be a crowd of people around them, looking at them and trying to figure out what they say. And it's just, you know, it's total involvement. You know, they almost have to go get stoned to come back to read them.
I remember going to Haight-Ashbury district, where the Grateful Dead lived in San Francisco, and going round to see them, because we had mutual friends, and I went round and sort of called on them. It was just like that, you know, just like mates and stuff.
What we're thinking about is a peaceful planet. We're not thinking about anything else. We're not thinking about any kind of power. We're not thinking about any of those kind of struggles. We're not thinking about revolution or war or any of that. That's not what we want. Nobody wants to get hurt. Nobody wants to hurt anybody. We would all like to be able to live an uncluttered life, a simple life, a good life, you know, and like think about moving the whole human race ahead a step or a few steps.
I think personally that the more people turn on, the better world it's going to be.
I remember thinking, I can't see this lasting, because the media are going to get this, and all this flower power and Haight-Ashbury, and it pretty soon turned to be Rip-Off Street, you know, where they knew kids were running away from home and going to Haight-Ashbury to be a wonderful, peaceful person. So, of course, all the rip-off merchants started to populate those places, Sunset Strip, Haight-Ashbury.
Sensational newspaper and television reports from the Haight-Ashbury had created a stereotype of hippie life as just one long round of non-stop sex and drugs. By autumn, quite apart from the tourists, the area was overwhelmed with confused young people attracted by that caricature.
People imitate. It's not from their own soul, from their own conviction of what something is. It's an imitation. And that's why we had the Death of Hippie event, is to beat the media its own game, trying to say, you know, don't do something because somebody else is doing it because this is how you feel about it. This is your nature. This is who you are. This is why you act. This is why you are. We carried a coffin down Haight Street, and people threw beads and trinkets into the coffin, and then it was taken down to the Panhandle, which is just right outside of Haight, and burned, as a pyre is burned. On the day of Death of Hippie, we gave everything away. There was one Vietnam vet who came in, and he had just come back, and he came in. We stayed open all night, and playing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. When I
I get older, losing my hair, many years from now, will you still be sending me a Valentine, birthday greetings, bottle of wine? If I've been out till 2:45, would you lock the door? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?
One guy from Vietnam gave me a medal of St. Michael. It was that feeling of gift and sharing. And then I headed out for the exorcism of the Pentagon.
There are slightly more than 100,000 people here.
And around the rest of the Western world, there were simultaneous demonstrations of support, coordinated by the newborn Vietnam Solidarity Campaign. The war was no longer simply an American issue. Meanwhile, in Washington, apart from the orthodox protest speeches, the task of writing and conducting the actual ritual of exorcism fell to Ed Sanders of the New York group The Pugs. He invoked a wide variety of forces.
In the name of Zeus, in the name of Anubis, god of the dead, in the name of sea-born Aphrodite, in the name of the
Thoth and Arurus and Pan and Thespis, I call down the spirits of blah, blah, blah into the blah, 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 you know, and blah, blahing and the blah, blah. And this right-wing nut started on a cherry pickers like this elevated roost that they clean trees with or something. Anyway, this guy was waving a Bible. I think it was Reverend Carl McIntyre. He came toward us, intoning, you know, "Thou shalt rot in hell, hippy dippies," you know. And so I was afraid he was going to ram us. So I was saying things, you know, I'm going to sew up your sphincter ani with 12 troll teeth or something. I don't know what I did, you know, something. And so he got out of the way. And Mailer and what's his name scooted by. Dwight McDonald, Mailer, and Robert Lowell were oozing up toward where they sat in, and it was, you know, it was quite weird, you know, but interesting. For the first time in my life, I got to insert rose stems with nice roses on the end of it down into the barrels of these rifles. And these poor 20-year-old kids were, you know, some guy in striped pants was shoving a rose petal down his M16 or whatever.
I'm fixing a hole where the rain gets in and stops my mind from wandering where it will go.
And there was this image that appeared in public of a somewhat timid, tender kid, but courageous, with his flower, poking it into the barrel of a soldier who was his same age, but in the wrong place at the wrong time, sweating and worried, and holding his rifle up against his fellow brother, college boy. An image of flower power. Flower power meant more than just walking around with flowers in your hair. It really meant the power of Earth itself. The dissolving of the authority of the Pentagon was symbolized by that moment of putting the flower in.
We want to really change it. And here you are at the Pentagon and
about 3 a.m. it went up. Didn't go up to 100 feet we wanted, but it turned orange, vibrated, went up about 10 feet. You can see it if you look at the pictures careful. And those pictures went all over the world. They had to bring out all their guards, you know, thousands of guards with bayonets and helmets and tanks and jeeps to guard. And it was that picture, you see, that we were looking for. If you want to conduct this war in Vietnam, you're doing it under siege of your own people.
Discovery Sunday.
There was this door that was blown open by God, and light shone in the world. Tons, huge amounts of light, at first blinding, and then a vision of a beautiful world started to be realized, and for about 1.5 years, the whole world felt that this is really true, Sergeant Pepper. Hey, it's really going to happen. And then fear and habit and inertia and doubt started to push the door closed. You know, they're still pushing now. Reagan is pushing so hard now. No, let's keep it what we're safe with, what we know about, no drugs, no God, no smoke, you know, close the door, and then still there's a light though under the door. A friend of mine told me, you know, a door can always be opened again.
Clear to the authorities on both sides of the Atlantic that all this nonsense was getting out of control and had to be stopped. Examples had to be made.
Hoppy, John Hopkins, one of the leaders, if that word is permissible, of the underground, was sent to prison by Judge Seaton, who described him as a pest to society. And we saw ourselves under attack. Earlier, International Times and the Indica Bookshop had been busted.
IT, the International Times, was produced from the basement of the bookshop. It was the underground's communications center, and to the police, faced with an often elusive quarry, it must have seemed an obvious place to start.
I think the police reacted so strongly to IT because of our advocacy of legalization of such drugs. We were opposed to censorship. We were generally an all-round libertarian paper, and this was very much against the way they thought Britain should be going.
There was a meeting of Hoppy's friends the next day. I brought up my idea of an advertisement. Miles said he thought he knew where he could raise the money.
It was pretty black and white at the time. It was like, a lot of people are doing it. Certainly were a lot of people doing it. It's like, why make criminals of them all was the basic thought.
On July the 24th, 1967, 64 people, well known variously in medicine, politics and the arts, including the 4 Beatles, put their names to a full-page petition in the London Times under the bold heading, "The law against marijuana is immoral in principle and unworkable in practice." Lord Hailsham told the editor that publishing it would be on his conscience forever.
It simply came to us as the proposed advertisement, and we had to decide whether to run it or not. I decided it because, as an editor, I had a commitment to freedom of debate. I'm quite convinced that even if you very strongly disapprove of views which are being put forward, that as an editor you actually have a duty to allow free debate to take place.
A separate matter, which was also to bring controversy to the pages of the Times, concerned 2 members of another well-known pop group.
Evidence that an unnamed naked woman was sitting on a sofa with a rug around her when police raided Keith Richards' house at West Wittering was given in court today. Defense counsel said that a national newspaper had tipped off the police that it would be worth their while to raid Richards' home for drugs on the Sunday afternoon, and the raid was carried out on that Sunday evening.
And the funny thing about it was, that they said in the newspapers later. Another internationally famous pop star and his wife escaped moments before the net closed in. I left her, it was about 7 a.m. So all it did was show me that they were waiting until I left, because they were climbing the ladder and they didn't want to get to the Fabs yet.
And there goes lunch for Fraser and Jagger in the cell. Prawn cocktail, roast lamb with mint sauce, fresh strawberries and cream, 21 and 6 for Jagger. Ice melon, salmon tail and fresh fruit, strawberries and cream.
Mick Jagger was fined £200 and sentenced to 3 months in prison. There was widespread public debate. Mick Jagger appealed, and the Times weighed in with a leader.
The quotation from Pope, "Who breaks a butterfly upon a wheel," reflected this extraordinary feeling of contrast one had between the sort of slim figure of Mick Jagger being exposed to the full weight and force of the law. And it was this sense that because he was famous, because he represented an aggressive approach to our existing culture, that he was not receiving justice, which made me feel very strongly that our existing culture was letting itself down.
It should be the particular quality of British justice to ensure that Mr. Jagger is treated exactly the same as anyone else, no better and no worse. There must remain a suspicion in this case that Mr. Jagger received a more severe sentence than would have been thought proper for any purely anonymous young man.
It's years since such crowds gathered to await an appeal verdict. But this was a Rolling Stones case, with the fans out in force. When Mick Jagger was conditionally discharged and Keith Richards sentenced twice, the pop idols drove off, the shadow of jail no longer over them.
Later that day, Mick Jagger flew to a country garden to meet a bishop, a leading Jesuit, a former Home Secretary, and the editor of the Times. 4 distinguished members of the establishment who were hoping he would be able to help them understand what was going on.
When you're young, very young, say 16, 17, you don't want anything to do with responsibility to society. You want to get on. One has just one's own very small life within a sort of teenage group. And then you don't want to care about everything that everyone else does is wrong, and you know it. But of course you're not always right. But that's all you want to do. And this is the main thing, is to start off with, was just have as good a time as possible.
But when the Beatles and the Rolling Stones came along and sort of grabbed media and turned it to their own purposes and actually put messages in their music and so on and so forth, this is a very big stimulation and a very big turn-on for us. And it was the light at the end of the tunnel. These things can be said. These things can be expressed. There is another way. You know, we don't simply have to put up with what is.
Discovery Sunday continue on the Discovery Channel.
You know, the media has an insatiable hunger, fellows. And it must report 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And then it always has to cloak what it's reporting in the conventional morality of the time.
Well, do you think you have now encouraged your fans to take drugs?
I don't think it'll make any difference. You know, I don't think my fans are going to take drugs just because I did, you know. The thing is, that's not the point anyway. You know, I was asked whether I had or not. And then from then on,
The whole bit about how far it's going to go and how many people it's going to encourage is up to the newspapers and up to you, you know, on television. I mean, you're spreading this now at this moment. This is going into all the homes, you know, in Britain. And I'd rather it didn't, you know. But you're asking me the question. You want me to be honest. I'll be honest, you know.
But as a public figure, surely you've got a responsibility to lots and
No,
lots
it's
of
you've
teenagers.
got the responsibility. You've got the responsibility not to spread this now. You know, I'm quite prepared to keep it as a very personal thing, if you will too. If you'll shut up about it, I will.
I very much resent the kind of media collaboration which tries to pass off the 60s as a drug-induced euphoria and a failure, and which has misrepresented a lot of our efforts to young people, thinking that it didn't work. Most of the people I know that are still living are carrying on their work. Their style has changed. Doesn't matter if they have long hair or short hair. But they're carrying on that kind of religious intention in their communities, with nature. I don't think it's been a failure. I think the Reagan years are a temporary reaction by the forces that were maybe threatened a little too assiduously during the 60s to regroup and remind themselves that the world paradigm that they understood is not completely shattered. But in fact, it is shattered. The times, they are changing. And I hope perhaps that if succeeding generations of young people could be a little more compassionate and not judge their elders so bitterly and leave the door open for more and more people, that change will continue to escalate. And each time around the spiral, you get a little more wisdom, and the group consciousness clicks just a notch higher, if we're lucky.
Love all you need. Yes, absolutely. In fact, I've got to give you a little quote on that, if you like. Where's that book? Is love all you need? I don't know, really. I don't know what you need, you know. I'm just some fella. And I haven't got any answers, you know, like, we're all just individuals. I don't think anyone's got the answer.
Love rules the court, the camp, the grove, the men below, and saints above. For love is heaven, and heaven is love. See? I certainly believe that.
The idea is noble. And it was the idea that I think imbued that whole age. It is one of the main things you need. And if you don't have that, all the rest of the stuff doesn't really matter.
Truth. You need truth. Love, God is love was one of the big expressions in the Haight-Ashbury. You saw that button, you saw it on walls. But God is truth. You need truth. Not just love. You need love. You have to have a heart. You have to speak from your heart. But you need truth. You have to speak the truth.
So, hey, I believe in that. I still will believe in it till I'm dead. Love is, you know, it's hokey and boring and trite and creepy, but love is the answer.
Love is all you need. 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 Love is all you need.
Well, I think the 60s was a very important period. Certainly was for me, and it was for the other Fabs and anybody else who was living in that period who derived any pleasure or any slight awakening or even a smile. It was certainly good enough to be able to review and think about, and I disagree with anybody who would say it was a lot of old cobblers, that it had no meaning and was poisonous, period. I think it was poisonous to people who weren't able to grow and accept that change was taking place.
In that kind of adventuring, there will be casualties. There were some few who didn't survive. Not many, though some of them were famous. But the year didn't die. No, the year lives on. I see it as a shiny year. One of my children was born that year, and I must say it does show.
Whatever else we're doing, because you just can't stop. You find yourself doing it whether you want to or not.
Sleeping and dreaming and waking, all those three states that people live through, is all only relative. It's being here now, which is the important thing. You know, there is no past and there's no future. Time is a very misleading thing. All there is ever is the now, and we can gain experience from the past, but we can't relive it. And we can hope for the future, but we don't know if there is one.